Hi everyone, welcome to another maths video by Maths with Sarah. So today we're going to be tackling this question that looks at some different functions and how we integrate those functions and do inverse functions. So again, this question comes from an AQA GCSE Maths paper. It's a calculator paper, paper 2. And again, it comes from the back of the paper. So it is looking at the grade 9 A-star style questions. So it's a bit of a challenge, but I'll talk you through it. So we've been given two different functions, f of x and g of x. Now remember, this f of x just means it's a function of x. So this is very much like saying y equals 5 minus x. They've just called it f of x. So a function of x is 5 minus x. And then g of x, where another function of x, again, could be y instead. The first part of the question is getting you to simplify this combination of f of x and g of x, and then finally to do to take the inverse function and then to solve it when it equals 2x. Okay, so I would encourage you to pause the video now, have a look at these questions, this question, both parts of it, and see if you to start with can do the whole question. If you can, then brilliant. If you can't, then have a little think about how you would go about doing it. So maybe you struggle with this part, but you can have a pretty good stab at this one. So yeah, just give it a go and come back and I'll talk you through it. Okay, so hopefully you've had a little think about how you do this. So I'm going to break it down into a number of different steps. So I'm going to start off by looking at what f of 2x is. So here we've been given f of x, and that equals 5 minus x. Now, as I said before, all this means is we do something to x, and that something is 5 minus x. So if we want to do the function of 2x, all we do is replace every time it says x in this equation, we replace it with 2x. So the function of 2x would therefore be 5 minus 2x. So although this part of the question probably actually looks quite scary, it's actually not too bad once you get into it. So if we do the same thing for the g of x, we've been given g of x equals 3x plus 7. And again, what we've been told is that we want, rather than having g of x, we want g of x minus 1. So instead of having x, we're going to put in x minus 1. So we're going to do exactly the same as we did for this one, just where there's x, put in x minus 1. So we'll have the same, we'll have 3, and we'll put it in brackets just to make things a little bit easier. And then we'll add 7 on the end. So if we were going to simplify this, we can multiply out the bracket, so we can get 3x minus 3 plus 7, which is then going to simplify to 3x plus 4. So if we go back to this original question, what we see is that it wants us to do f of 2x plus g of x minus 1. So we've got f of 2x over here. We've got g of x minus 1 here. So if we add the two together, we're going to end up with 5 minus 2x plus 3x plus 4. Hopefully you can see if we now simplify that, we're going to end up with 5 plus 4, which is 9, minus 2x plus 3x, that will be plus x. So the final answer to the first part is just going to be 9 plus x, or x plus 9. So hopefully that made sense to you. I tried to do it kind of as simply as I could. Just remember that if it says, say, f of x or f of 2x, all you're doing is just substituting everywhere that it says x, put in 2x instead. Okay, so that's the first one. I'll leave the answer up here. And then I'll clear the screen and move on to the second part. So the second part it's a little bit more difficult. So you've got to remember what this g to the minus 1 of x means. And that means to the inverse function. So the first step that we'll do is go about working out what the inverse is, and then we can look at solving it. So what does the inverse mean to start with? What it essentially means is whatever is written here in g of x, we need to do the opposite. So the easiest way that I find to do these is to set them equal to y. So if we, instead of having g of x, if we have y, substitute that for y, then we have y equals 3x plus 7. Now we're going to try and essentially undo this function so that we end up with just x on its own on this side. And we'll do all of the functions to y instead. So just as if we were going to solve this equation, we're going to start off by minus 7 from both sides. That will give us y minus 7 on this side equals 3x. And then to solve this for x, we'll divide both sides by 3. So we'll end up with y minus 7 over 3 equals x. And so this here is the inverse function of g of x. And you can see that essentially it's just completely the opposite. We've just done the opposite of this to work out this. So this is our g to the minus 1 of x. And what it's telling us is that this is equal to 2x. So what we've got to do here, if we figure out the, sorry, let's go back a step. If we work out g to the minus 1 of x, what we need to do now is just to substitute this in so that this, rather than having the y here, we'll have it as an x instead. So we're basically going back to putting x in there, and this is the inverse function. So for this, we'll have x to the minus x minus 7 divided by 3. Exactly what we've got here. Rather than having the y, we've just put the x back in because that's what the function is of here. So now we've been given this equation that g to the minus 1 of x, or the inverse function of g, equals 2x. We can now start to solve this just as we would a normal equation. We can set this equal to 2x. So if we have x minus 7 all over 3 equals 2x. So now again, we'll times both sides by 3. So we'll get x minus 7 equals 6x. We can then subtract x from both sides, and that will give us minus 7 equals 5x. And then finally, if we do this division, we'll divide both sides by 5. We'll get minus 7 over 5 equals x. And this is our final answer for part 2. So functions are typically considered one of the harder topics. There is nothing that makes them particularly complicated other than just using this new notation. So rather than putting in y, it allows us to do things like this by substituting in, say, 2x in place of x, or x minus 1 in place of x. And we also have to remember the inverse function, which is essentially where you do the opposite. So you're just solving it as that's equal to y. Okay, so hopefully you found that useful. You found it boosted your confidence a little bit with how to use functions. And also hopefully reassured you that although this question might look quite scary, there's actually nothing that's too difficult in it, assuming that you understand the basic rules of algebra. So it'd be really great if you could like and subscribe to these videos. Then you'll get notified as soon as the first one comes out. But lastly, thank you very much for watching.